Good morning, everyone, and welcome to GCAP. I hope you have a fun and productive week and get some time to see some fantastic talks, make connections, and generally have the opportunity to network. My name is Dean Finnigan, as I can see familiar faces, some of you may know, and I'm currently lead artist at Wargaming Sydney, hence the t-shirt. And my session today is about prototyping. My intention for this session is to share my thoughts and experiences and hopefully provoke some thoughts about your practice too. This is absolutely not a perfect guide to prototyping. In the studio in Sydney, we're in the thick of several prototyping projects at the moment. So I want to reflect on this process, seeing as we're right in there doing it at this moment in time. I just want to talk about why it exists and how it fits into development. And by kind of researching this session, it's just allowed me to muse over sort of what factors make a great prototyping team, and try to dissect key elements of this really highly creative process. Okay. So to give some context for this session, I just want to show where I've come from and how this has informed sort of my practice as it is now and my approach. Here's a visual snapshot of some of the studios I've been involved with over the years. I originally started my career in the UK, hence the accent. And over the last 25 years, I've had a pretty fantastic time and also not so fantastic time, working with some great studios on some great projects. And this is really extending into Wargaming Sydney as well. I've also, listening to Anne's talk this morning, really resonated. I've also worked through all those cliches, the heavy crunchers, projects exploding out. I've kind of been there and picked up a lot of the battle scars along the way as well. But all along the way, it's been really interesting to see how companies adapt their process to try and make game development as smooth as possible. Not always has it been successful, as you can probably testify to that as well. I've been lucky enough to work for studios that have always released products. Is that Tim? Yeah. You know, which is great. It's always fantastic to get your products out there into the public domain, and I've always worked for companies that have, we've always made that happen. And I've witnessed the development cycle from start to end many, many times over. And it's also been interesting to see how development has changed over the years as well. So I've worked on, this is a snapshot of some of the projects that I've worked on. There's some familiar faces that I can see that I've worked with as well. So you'll obviously share some of those experiences. Lots of them I've been really lucky enough to work on some really high-profile projects. And obviously, working on high-profile projects is really fraught with a lot of difficulties. And I've always been really excited by those challenges as I've kind of started each one of those projects. And that's one of the reasons that I often go searching for those really good, challenging projects as well. It's a massive leap into the unknown, as you probably realise game development is. The creative problem solving as part of a great team is an amazingly satisfying experience, and that's what I really seek out as much as I can all the time. And to me, that is the essence of game development in that sentence. Along the way, there's been many, many mistakes to work from, and still working it out. And many of these games have been really ambitious, and we've worked it out on the fly as we go. But you know, after all this time, I'm still really passionate about games, really passionate about development as well. Not jaded. Okay. So, you'd be forgiven into thinking that after working on all these titles for all these studios, that game development would now be such an easy thing to do. To quote that classic Australian saying, yeah, nah. In reality, as you all probably experience this, game development is really, really hard. But at the same time, it's also really, really rewarding. And there's no better feeling when you're working on a product and it feels great and it's fun to play and it goes out there into the public and it's really well received. A great game is so much more than the sum of its parts. They're a perfect storm of interaction and emotion, of mechanics, immersion, many, many more. I'll be trying to list all those elements for days. To make a great game takes thousands of decisions along the way. And it's about how every system interacts with one another. Nothing is in a vacuum, and how all the parts of a game are essentially an ecosystem that affect each other. Okay. I like this quote from an artist, I think he's an environment artist from Insomniac. And he says, "The challenge of making a game is sometimes like trying to build a house blindfolded. You can plan out where the walls will be, what the rooms will be like, how to make it stable and functional. But until you're actually in that space, you don't really know," which I thought was a really great way of defining game development. Okay, right, warning. This is the world according to Dean. Okay. So just kind of reflecting on, I've been working in games since '93. So looking back and reflecting on those processes and how we apply those processes now, it's just been interesting to witness how game development has really changed along the way. And hopefully looking at this, the intention to do this is to just give context in terms of how prototyping is really prevalent in game development at the moment. So thinking back on the productions, I've put into 4 neatly packaged eras. Welcome to my world. Okay, so the first one, so this is kind of my experience, and obviously this is my framework. But I started in 1993 working on point-and-click titles for a couple of years, and then moved on to PlayStation titles soon after that. And I just remember the approach to development was to work it out as you go. Or the more technical term, winging it, which seemed to be, that was the way forward. It was a reflection of where the industry was at that time. And it seemed that production sort of started from ideas on the back of a beer mat. That just seemed to be the sort of, the time that all the studios were developing, and that was the process. It didn't seem that there was a requirement for design documents, prototypes, that iterative approach. You just got stuck straight in. We were full on in production from day one, even though we had no idea where we were going. I remember long hours, lots of crunch, because we were just working it out as we go. The team would also try and work out massive technical problems, as well as trying to resolve creative and design problems as well. This is that time in game development where there were no third-party tools. A lot of the studios were writing their own bespoke engines as we go as well. So it was that perfect storm of, you know, nothing to work with for ages and ages, and the creatives and the designers are trying to work things out as well. So it's pretty chaotic. Whoops. Move on. So if you go to Alex Carlisle's talk this afternoon, Alex is head creative at Wargaming. He's got a great session on communicating design. So this is sort of my second era of development. And when I first joined Team Bondi, that's when I first came to Australia, and I saw the game design doc and thought how impressive it was. The entire game presented in this A3 book, absolutely loaded with ideas around movement mechanics, fighting mechanics, cases, driving. In fact, all aspects of the game were there. Cool. They've worked it all out. What could possibly go wrong? I read it the first 2 weeks, was totally impressed with it, and then didn't really refer to it much after that. Sorry, Alex. But I think, looking back, this was an era that seemed to be an overcompensation, a kind of bounce back from that sort of first time, trying to work out too much detail in documentation. Experience tells you that as soon as a playable experience starts to emerge, then decisions are made in response to that process. And that's what I really love about game development. It's a very emerging, experiential development process. Very quickly, the game design document gets left behind. And it's just a lot of work to keep it up to date, as Alex will talk about. There's an interesting sort of project slightly after Team Bondi. I worked for a company and we had this project which was in effect a cinematic prototype. That's the only time I've ever done it, and the only time I've not done it before then, not done it since. So they came to the studio. I can't say the name of the title. It was a pretty big title. And they wanted a 2 to 3 minute cinematic which reflected the end gameplay. They'd not even gone into production yet. So it was something they wanted to reflect the end gameplay and the visual fidelity of what the game would be. It was a console game as well. The main purpose of this really expensive process was to allow it was to present to the development team so that they had this vision of what they would be making, this kind of thing to refer to as they went into production. So we explored things like, the visual fidelity, the UI. We worked out key gameplay mechanics in that visual cinematic context. Did they use it for the entire production? Well, about a year later, the project got canned. But what is interesting is that it just shows the attempts that studios did go to and do go to try and make game development as easy as possible. Okay, so that leads us nicely to prototyping. Rough ideas, winging it, static documentation just don't seem to get you anywhere nowadays. It's really a requirement to present either a playable demo, a prototype, or several prototypes. It's way better to convince stakeholders that the project has eliminated as many risks as possible. That's the reason that you prototype. And it seems to be now a pretty established process. And you're working out ideas on the fly. It can be quite an experiential process. It's a less risky way of solving key issues and core mechanics of your game as well. It seems obvious now that prototyping is accepted as a norm of development. We've just kind of moved into this era of game development, and that is now the accepted way forward, which is great. The fourth stage and last stage of Dean's Guide to Game Development is prototypes plus data. And that's something that we are really engaged with at Wargaming Sydney, is good prototypes backed up with good analytical data of your proposed players. And that seems to be now the way forward. The more data that allows you to anticipate the way forward, the better it is. So, all the way the process is trying to eliminate risks. Okay, By the way, these are not images of projects we're working on. I just want to say that, throw you a curveball. It's funny, giving a talk on prototyping at Wargaming, I can't actually reveal what it is we're working on, so an interesting talk. So what has allowed prototyping to be this core process? And for me, one of the big kind of reasons are third-party engines. You know, the rise of, you know, I'm sure you use Unity, Unreal, CryEngine. You know, there's loads out there. That to me is kind of pivotal for this process to really take hold in the game development. And I think it goes without saying that they're a natural necessity for this stage, for working out your ideas. At Wargaming Sydney, we're leveraging Unreal for our prototyping. And, you know, the authoring tools, the kind of development environment is just fantastic for artists, tech artists, designers, engineers to all kind of work in this collaborative environment and push ideas forward. In essence, the third-party tools, engines are great for prototyping. I did talk to engineers before I came out. There are obviously downsides. You know, they aren't the perfect tool, but they really, really do the job for that prototyping process. Okay. If your prototype fails nowadays, it should mainly be because your game is kind of, you know, is boring, it's not fun to play, or key mechanics are not working out. It shouldn't be because you've got key technical problems in the prototyping phase. So what is prototyping then? In its fundamental form, I think prototyping is, the idea is to answer questions. Okay. But you have to make it a good question. Make it a good question that you can evaluate whether it's been successful or not. If you just simply say, is this fun, it's not really a great question. Really, you should be asking those questions of, you know, is this mechanic working with this mechanic? Does this camera really enhance this particular part of gameplay? Those very specific questions. A great and potential crazy idea that is playable works a lot better for winning over stakeholders. You've got something to play, and that's the real sort of key value of prototyping. It's got more value than any amount of discussion or documentation. I like this quote: prototypes are one of the best ways to document a design, a more dynamic, tangible form of ideas working together. So it's all about, what you get with prototyping is all about the interactivity, the behaviors, even the feelings and that emotional connectedness to your proposed idea. So much more than the sum of the parts, and that's what prototyping gives you as well. It's document that doesn't need to be read, but experienced, so that's quite an interesting kind of development from game design documents. This was a pretty good analogy. A prototyping is finding true north. Sometimes ideas may often reach dead ends before finding that true direction, hopefully. But don't forget, if your prototype either confirms or destroys that original idea, that is still a good outcome as well. You're just not going to spend that money, as I've witnessed before early on, going into full production and finding out that it's a disastrous thing to do. Okay, I've got a little story. So when it was about 2006, I just arrived in Australia, and I was planning lots of really big mocap shoots, and we went to quite a large VFX studio overseas to do the shoot. And they were in the thick of some pretty successful films that they were finishing off. And I walked around the studios, and there was this poster pretty much everywhere in all the studios. And there was a caricature of the director, and there was this quote underneath. And it says, "I don't know what I want, but show me something and I'll tell you if I like it." And at the time I thought, wow, that's pretty scathing of the director. But it was everywhere. And I kind of didn't think much of it at the time, but nowadays I keep coming back to it and just feel that it's a great development philosophy, especially where prototyping is concerned. Games are that elusive combination of emotion and experience. If you define a combat mechanic as a rough sketch or detail it in a design doc, it's completely open to interpretation. You've got no idea if it's going to work or not. You can sit and debate for hours what is the best solution, and I've kind of witnessed a lot of teams when they've got an idea on paper trying to work out how they're going to go about doing it, or what's the best solution as a discussion takes ages, and you've not even made a start yet. So prototypes allow you to do that. The more you connect your prototype with the audience, the more successful prototyping is. So show me something and I'll tell you if I like it. That's really, really relevant to prototyping, I think. So as Anne was saying this morning, this is something that I really feel as well, is that prototyping and game development as well is very much the product of a highly creative, multidisciplined team. I really believe that. And I'll go into this a little bit later. It's not an easy process for sure, and it takes a certain mindset to kind of get into that framework. I've kind of seen teams go from production trying to get into prototyping, and it does take a lot of adjustment. Prototyping is not development. It's a fast-paced environment where you're responding quite often to this emerging experience as you go. You have to know that sometimes you don't make the best decision, you just have to make a decision straight away. Keep progressing. And I was talking to Aidan, one of our product owners in the studio, and we were talking about this the other day, and he came up with this fantastic quote. So I said I'd nick it. He said, "The decision you make is right for right now. It doesn't mean it's the right decision." Okay. And that really sort of reflects the prototyping process. Is you're responding to things, you're making decisions as you go, but then you might work out that it might not be the way forward. And that's a good kind of approach to prototyping. You've got to know that you're going to throw work away. I mean, that's a kind of a big mindset for the teams. It'll happen many times throughout a prototype. So don't latch onto ideas and don't spend too long getting those ideas in, because they may get thrown away. Get out of that development mode, out of that detail mode, which is a much slower process. Let go of that perfection in favour of emerging gameplay and that kind of experience. Often as that experience becomes more visible, then it often raises a lot more questions as well. So again, it's like a really difficult compounding problem. But respond to those questions. That's the really important thing. But stay in sight of your original intentions of what the prototype should be. Embrace the reworking. I think that's really important. Lots and lots of reworking. I want to talk a little bit about the visual fidelity of prototypes, because I've seen how important this can be. And it's something that I've been having a lot of discussions and a lot of observations about a lot of prototyping projects that we've been doing, and how that affects certain stakeholders that you might be presenting to. Generally nowadays, day-to-day basis, people are interacting with products that are much more finished, much more final than they've ever been. The public's got a higher level of acceptance of what quality is, especially for games as well. That language of what good games is pretty much kind of established now, even for the public. And this is not just the visual quality bar, it's the experience as a whole as well. So those expectations of playing games and the visual fidelity of what they are well and truly defined. And I think the language of prototyping sits firmly within these expectations as well. After all, the intentions of prototyping is eventually to move an idea into production. ultimately the idea, unless you like prototyping as a process. So how you present this to your stakeholders and your target audience has an incredible amount of value and importance. I often hear people say that like the visual quality of a prototype is kind of just fluff or visual dressing. But we've been working on current prototypes where sort of the visual art, the animation is a real direct interface of how the player is experiencing the mechanics. So it's so much integral to them as those mechanics as well. So if you ignore presentation, I think that does have a real detriment to the prototype, especially when you want your stakeholders to be emotionally attached to your prototype. So there's an established mentality that prototypes should be what you call grey box. So I think when I say grey box, I can basically look around the room and you all know what that means. Is that right? Nod your head? Yeah. Yeah, so it's pretty established now. And for me, that's, it's really a massive part of that iterative process that prototyping is and game development is. But who is your audience? I think that's what you really need to question. How you gauge that final presentation to your stakeholders is really important. Grey boxing is great for internal development. It's a language by which developers work to. But consider that your stakeholders might not be aware of what that grey boxing means or how it refers, how they can make the connection to the kind of finished product that your developers have really got that vision for. Okay, so it's something that grey boxing is great for your internal team. Just be aware of who you're presenting that to. I've had some horror stories, not with wargaming, in previous projects where I've shown a prototype to somebody that was pretty development savvy, and then the first question that came out of it was, is that level going to be grey? So it obviously really missed the point. So this is the point I'm trying to make, is the visual fidelity it really is important. So this slide shows the comparison between early crude grey box and the finished prototype aesthetic. Hope you can tell the difference. It's the same scene. So, both were used as that prototyping process. One was obviously the start of things emerging, and then we started to consider how we would present that to the stakeholders as well. So you've got to start somewhere. It's got to be quick and rough. That's imperative to get that experience going. Don't invest time in it, and changes and complete redirections will be easier after that. If you don't invest time, then you're not going to be really annoyed when things totally taken about face, which does happen a lot as well. So in my experience, tested both high and low fidelity prototypes with users, engagement level and emotional attachment does change now, and I've kind of really witnessed that as well. So it's just something to bear in mind. You achieve more of a connection to an implied game if you can really sell it. And one of the most successful prototypes I've been a part of, it really allowed a better connection to that experience, and it allowed the stakeholders to sort of go beyond what the obvious was, and we started to just talk about real deeper questions of nuanced mechanics and that kind of thing. And that was because I really believe that there was this just better connection to where they saw the product. Is there a danger of going too far? Yes, of course there is. It's not game development. You're not making a finished product, but presenting a high fidelity prototype is just something to bear in mind. I've not paid attention to it, and so this might be a good exercise if you're ever in this situation. But I'd be interested to see if you're presenting prototypes to stakeholders, just see the difference in connection or the questions that they may have with whether it's high fidelity or low fidelity. I'm quite interested by that. Something to test. Okay. Even if you feel that grey boxing is the desired aesthetic, that's totally fine. It still has to be well considered. Otherwise, it's just going to be a massive distraction. And obviously, I'm biased because being the lead artist at Sydney, that's kind of my focus. But I really believe that as well. So this image is a development environment, and only that. It looks terrible, it's pretty bland, and it hurts my eyes. But it served its purpose. You know, it was something that allowed the dev team to get going on mechanics and iterate and keep going from there. That's where the use of that environment ends for me. And if you don't have anyone in the team that's got aesthetic sensibilities, I think that might be quite detrimental to how you present it as well. And it's just to say, this is an image that I got not attached to any studio, but it's just a real sort of reflection that grey boxing can still be visually well considered. Okay, so it's not to say that your prototypes have to be kind of super high res, detailed all the time. Just make sure they're well considered, and that does really play a lot in getting that connection to your stakeholders. If something's really visually bloody awful, you can't really get beyond that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the more day-to-day focus. I've had my rant of visual fidelity. This is a photograph of our prototype board. Just to make the image look good, I moved all the tasks over to the done section. Not really. They'd kill me. So this is the sort of planning nerve centre of our prototyping team. It's the only way we manage progression. This is prototype talking. Certainly we don't manage development like this. And it just prevents too much time being wasted on the actual planning of the process. Prototyping moves so fast that you just don't have time to really invest in over planning. And as the title suggests, I really am a firm believer that over planning just takes longer to be wrong. That's quite an interesting thought. Don't assume that slow and careful planning will get you to success more quickly. Okay, I've experienced that a lot with really over-documented game designs, and I think, to have that with prototyping is just kind of the wrong approach to it. So having a well thought out plan that avoids failure is really unoriginal. That's not the reason you prototype. You prototype to take risks, to explore things, to try things out, to go in directions that you just wouldn't ever consider before. That's the beauty of that prototyping process. Okay. While I was doing lots of research for this talk and really thinking about prototyping and development as a process, I've been really kind of inspired by Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's an awesome book. And that really sort of confirmed the alignment with prototyping. And Ed Catmull is kind of one of the directors of Pixar, so they're kind of working things out as well. And he talked about this American statistician called William Deming, and he was instrumental for, weirdly, the rise in the Japanese economy after World War II, where they started to be producing innovative, high-quality products, and there's some real takeaways. This is referring back to the kind of early 1950s, but it's really relevant to prototyping. The responsibility for finding and fixing problems should be assigned to everyone. This I really believe in. If anyone at any level finds a problem, they should be empowered to stop the production line. So, again, really relevant. Workers could call out problems, suggest changes, and feel the pride that came when it helped fix that problem as well. So it's all about getting the team invested in the project. Japanese production line became a place where the workers' engagement strengthened the product. And I've seen that time and time again. When the team is really invested in that product, the product really, really shines. Don't ask permission to take responsibility. So they were sort of key things that I really took from that really applied to that prototyping process. So everything so far sounds amazing. Process of prototyping is obviously a seamless progression as you go from point A to point B. Absolutely not the case at all. And I thought this image really summed up kind of that prototyping and game development process. And it takes, you know, a certain mindset for the team. You have to embrace the fact that there's failures. There's a lot of them. There's lots of wrong turns, lots of dead ends, but that's still a big part of the progress. If you're discounting ideas that are just not working in prototyping, well, that's great. That's just part of the strengthening of the idea as you go. If you know where you're going, well, what's the point of prototyping? So it is this massive leap into the unknown. It's a massive risk. There's going to be trials and tribulations all along the way. Thousands and thousands of decisions are made almost daily, weekly, when you're in that prototyping, and often when you're in game development as well. I'd be interested to track the kind of decision-making process in games and see how that would graph out. I'm sure it'd be pretty chaotic. But this is just part of that process of responding, making decisions, iterating, responding again. It's that very cyclical kind of creative problem solving. On a really regular basis, I've seen something emerge from out of nowhere. You know, just when you think something's not working, somebody will do something and it really transforms that experience. And that, to me, is kind of that real buzz of game development and prototyping as well. It's not magic. It seems like it. It's just the result of patience, of hard work, and the teams kind of taking the risks to find things out. Okay, so the team has to take risks with prototyping. It's all right to make mistakes. Don't let that fear in doing something wrong prevent you from trying something out. After chatting to many devs in the studio and friends and colleagues that I've kind of had the pleasure of working with over a long period, this is the satisfaction that teams really respond to. You've got to embrace those mistakes and adapt and learn from them as well. It might uncover like a new way of doing things, and things can emerge really unexpectedly. And often, as a prototyping team, you might have to like really pivot on the fly as something starts to emerge that you really think has got some legs. So if you're not experiencing failure, you're being driven by the need to avoid it, which is really not the idea of prototyping as well. So you've got to somehow get the team to embrace that. I think failure is a fundamental lesson to good design, and it's something that's not really taught an awful lot, but I really think that is, you know, it's part of the process. You know, whenever you see a finished game, you don't see all the failings, all the wrong turns that make that product what it is. That motley crew. So the team approaches to creativity. I've started kind of saying this and this saying that I stumbled on the other day, and I've heard other people say it as well, which has been quite interesting to see how other people are embracing it. If all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. okay, which is quite an old saying. I think it's a Maslow saying. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about multidiscipline teams. Multidiscipline teams, no matter how small, always has to be the way. I'm really a firm believer of this. For me, it's really the key to creativity. The structure of our teams at Wargaming, we've got a few engineers, tech designer or designer, tech artist, which are artists combined, QA, PO, product manager. That's kind of roughly the essence of a team. And the success of prototyping really allows that collaboration, that creation and validation of ideas from many disciplines. I think that really, really makes a successful team. Again, there's a quote from Ed Catmull that said, "Give a good idea to a mediocre team and they'll screw it up. Give a mediocre idea to a great team and they'll either fix it or come up with something better." Okay. And that to me is, again, the essence of prototyping, where often your ideas or your early questions might not be that great, but if the team is really creative and really collaborating and firing on all cylinders, then they'll start to work out those better ideas, and I've really seen that happen as well. So the dangers of investing energy and passion while remaining objective is really hard. Okay, you've got to have strong ideas, but hold on to them loosely. Opening yourself up to feedback just allows you to explore concepts and avenues that you just wouldn't necessarily explore, and takes you out of your comfort zone. So the fact that ideas and thoughts are coming in from every discipline is really a good thing for the team. It's easier said than done, though. You need that positive mindset and willing to share ideas. That post-it nerve center is great for the team in that it keeps everything transparent, everything's out there for the team to experience. And prototyping is such a fast iteration of ideas coming and going. So I actually think the process of prototyping means that you can't be precious over your ideas anyway, because they come and go. So that can lead to better collaboration in its nature of process. Okay, so this is our playtest area in Wargaming Sydney. I've blurred out the monitors. This was an actual playtest. I was actually thinking of putting other images on there to really throw you off the scent. But so this is the playtesting as a team is really fundamental to the prototype process. The playtests are structured and respected, and that's really important. So they consist of an initial gathering by the team to talk about what they're actually going to test, what elements of mechanics is something new emerging that needs to be contrasted with how it was before. And then you have the playtest session. Playtest sessions are recorded, so you can easily detail, if there are bugs that people experience or just weird edge case behaviours, it's recorded and you can refer back to it. Just rather than going, yeah, it was in that level kind of 10 minutes in, you've got a recording of it, so that's really important. And after the session, we stand around the whiteboard and give feedback. Everyone has the opportunity to give feedback, and this is why it's really important. The team is absolutely aligned every day with the emerging prototype, and that's where they're invested in it. And then those ideas are documented, written down, and then they go back to the post-it note board. Okay, so it's a really great social cyclical production process. Wow, that was a lot of words. Okay, and really simplified, that's the cycle. So it moves, you know, if I start off at the bottom with the post-it notes, that's where we do the stand-ups every day, the team's aligned. You work out who's doing what for the day, and then you go off and collaborate. That develops the prototype. And then you start preparing for your, preparing the build to playtest, which is every day, and that's respected as far as you can manage it. Some days you just get crashes that just won't emerge. And then you have the playtest, and then you iterate and feedback as a team as well. And that's that daily, even more cyclical process. Okay. There are pitfalls. So, you know, great prototyping is a great team firing on all cylinders. That's absolutely true. And it takes a lot of hard work to get to that stage. And there are pitfalls, and I want to highlight two. So feeling that you're all in it together and every team member is empowered can really start to fall away if you give responsibility of tasks to certain roles. Okay. And I'll explain this further. This might be a bit radical. So, there's no monopoly on design to designers. Ooh. I'm really a firm believer in this. Alex is looking at me. So what do I mean by that? I just mean that if you want the whole team invested, the whole team has got to feel that it's contributing and that they are of value to the thing developing. As soon as you start saying, yep, this is a problem, we'll give it to the designers to solve out, you're excluding the team, and I've really seen that have huge detriment. So just be careful about that. That's not to say, you know, that's not dismissing design as a hugely important part of the team, but you know, I think the designer's role is to sort of engage with everybody, not just be the sole focus of design. Okay. Secondly, you know, everybody should be encouraged to make things better at all times. It's not about seeking permission. This is really hard to manage. I don't have a specific answer. But I've heard this all too often, and it's really not a good thing to hear. And you may have heard this as well. When you talk to people about a certain problem and they say, yeah, I've noticed this problem and I raised it as a bug last week, but I'm not allocated to fix this, so I can't do anything about it. That's real. When I hear that, it's not a real conducive part of that prototyping process. I think you know, you've got to allow people to take ownership and have the opportunity to fix things wherever they possibly can. Sure, sometimes it can be quite chaotic, but you know, I think using the post-it note as the nerve center, then everybody kind of knows what everybody's doing and can say what they want to fix as well. Is pretty important. All right, so moving quickly on, I think I'm out of time. So game developers are sometimes the worst testers. Okay. As the thing progresses, the developers get expert at playing what it is. Okay, and I've often seen a team really maximize what the prototype is and have such a fantastic experience, and then they hand it over to somebody new and they just do like drive a character into a wall or something because they just can't control it. So just be aware of the team and how it's getting expert of playing your prototype. You are not your players. That's something to be important. So what's the solution? The solution is to gather new feedback. In Sydney, we invite other teams to come and play test regularly, but also data. Okay, so we use at Wargaming Sydney, we use UX Labs real extensively as part of prototyping, and you know, it's just a fantastic way of accurately understanding your target players and what experience they're getting from the game as well. Okay, and it leads back to that sort of fourth phase of development where prototyping with good data really can help that process move along. Okay. Don't forget, though, that prototypes can really rapidly shift. And sometimes, which is what we've recently experienced, is we've sent something off to a UX lab. By the time the data comes back, the prototype has shifted massively. So just be aware of what you're getting tested and just remember what the game was when you were getting that data back. And it may be that the team has already solved a lot of those issues that the lab is putting back. All right, so easy. So starting the game, from prototyping to game development is, I have to say, is an unknown experience for me. I've kind of been through all the other leads into production or just straight into production. From prototyping into production, I've not really experienced that. But I think I'm really excited by the potential opportunities we've got in Sydney, and just to put that to the test. So I'm really interested in whether the prototype just gets archived after 2 weeks or if it's still a good reference for the development as it moves forward as well. That's something, if anybody's gone through that process, I'm really keen to chat and find out as well. I'm really intrigued by that. Okay, so what's next? Wargaming Sydney is it's a transitioning studio. We've got a really successful history of being really immersed in technology and working with other studios, and that will still remain. But we're on a journey now to take advantage of more game development opportunities, and this is where I fit in as well. So we're in the midst of a cultural transformation. And the creative team is building, and we've already got an excellent, small but perfectly formed creative team. And Anne mentioned this as well today. That team is, we've kind of assembled of people that we've worked with before. I really am a believer that you keep your strong people that you enjoy working with. Keep them close throughout your career, and I've worked with a lot of people a lot of the same people in different studios. So we're doing lots of prototyping. We're working with other studios in the UK, working on their development titles as well. So Sydney is quite a vibrant, dynamic place to work. Okay, so if you are interested, wgsydney.com. We are looking for people all the time, so keep your eye out. And I really appreciate the time that you've spent here. And what I'm interested, I wanted to see if this works. So, like game dev and prototyping is something that I am really passionate about, so I'm really keen on sharing any stories that you've got and experiences that you've got, and make connection, and I'm happy to chat if you collar me. All right, thank you.